Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Skwawk Talk on Socialist Telly. We understand that Twitter is having some technical problems tonight, so I don't know how many of you will be able to see this live, but it will be there on catch up. And if Twitter doesn't catch it, then we'll put it out again when it's working properly. Well, I'm very glad to be joined by Bonnie and Demo tonight. We may have Jen from our team joining us later on this evening when she gets back from another meeting, and we will be looking back at last night's Ordinary Left Festival of Ideas, which was a rip-roaring success from everything that I saw about it. I mean, I watched it all the way through. It was a series of fascinating discussions, really, but also some really good banter. And, you know, despite Twitter's issues, which were also hitting last night, we saw it reach, I think, over 30,000 people so far and counting. So we'll be running the link along the bottom of the screen here later on just to let you go and find it if you want to watch the whole thing for yourselves. But we had a fantastic set of panelists and a very engaged set of viewers who were chipping in lots of comments as well. So thank you to all of those. And thanks particularly to our panelists, which were Claudia Webb, Belle Ribeiro-Addy, Neil Findlay, former MSP, John Trickett, Howard Beckett, Ian Lavery, and of course, Socialist Telly's own Bonnie and Jen, and did a brilliant job of chairing the event. Guys, you want to give a few first thoughts before we start looking back at a few details?
What a brilliant panel we had. Obviously, in my section had Damo and Ems also from Ordinary Left Socialist Telly. We were myself and Jen were absolutely spoiled by the people we had to chat with and throw some ideas around with. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was nice to show my face just briefly. But yeah, full plaudits to Bonnie and Jen for hosting an absolutely fantastic evening and a fantastic lineup of guests. It was great to have a new face on Socialist Telly in the form of Belle Ribeiro-Addy. She hasn't been on before. And of course, we're joined by other guests who've been on before and are always good value for money. And they brought in some really interesting discussions, some very interesting points. And I especially enjoyed hearing about some of their backgrounds and, you know, their ordinary, that these extraordinary people are actually, and how no different to the rest of us, frankly, that they actually are. And it shows that anybody can actually do what they do, should you wish to.
Well, we had quite a few people feeding back on the kind of level, you know, how down to earth the people involved in the show were, and how much that showed, you know, how badly we need more working class people in politics. Because, you know, if most political programs were anything like last night's one, then I think a lot more people would want to watch them and get informed instead of watching people drone on and sound all, you know, like they've been squashed through the same sausage making machine. And there was one particular bit of banter that people highlighted as a favorite, which I'm going to show now for a couple of minutes if I can bring up the right video, and then we'll come back for more discussion.
So my great mates, by the way, Ian and Neil, it's great to see you, comrades.
And you, John, and you.
How's things, Mr. Trickett? Are you okay?
Well, Ian always calls him Mr. Trickett because we once did a meeting in somewhere in the northwest. I don't know where it was, but it's the other side of the Pennines from where, you know, God's country is, as you know. And the guy who was leading us through it, he kept on insisting, I'll talk Mr. Trickett now to speak next. Ever since then, he's called Trickett, and I've decided to call Ian Mr. Lafferty.
It was better than Mr. I thought it might have been Mr. Laverty.
That's better. What am I using?
No, Mr. Finley.
And on that illustrious note, I'm going to thank the guests for joining me for our.
So yeah, that was quite typical of the level of chat through the night, which was you know, a lot of people found highly entertaining and not your usual fare when it comes to politicians, particularly the Westminster variety. So that was very refreshing. What did you guys make of that, and did you have any other favourite bits in that sense?
I think it's really important that everyone gets to see that MPs are human beings. they can be ordinary people. They can have a joke, but they can also deal with the very, very serious matters that impact us all. We've got a big project on the left. What we need to do is make sure that people feel that politics is accessible and that they can be a part of it, and that it can be exciting and fun, as well as just hours of debate and legislation and things like that that turn people off of politics. Obviously, the biggest vote in so many elections in the UK is a vote for nobody. More people stay away from the polls when it comes to election days than vote for any other particular party. All those votes, if we can engage those people into politics, then all of those people can make a real difference. But they will only get engaged in politics if they start seeing their values, their lives reflected back on them from the people that are asking for their votes.
Yeah, Mr. Trickett referring to God's own country there. It's not the flag of Yorkshire I've got behind me today. I must admit that my favourite part of it was very similar to what Bonnie has just outlined, actually. As much as the banter and the fun and the human side of these MPs, they're not robots, they're not droids. Which
some of them aren't.
Well, we didn't have them on. We had some class acts on yesterday. They could easily do a turn on the comedy circuit, some of them. But it was very nice. I felt that Ian Lavery, particularly Ian Lavatory, brought up the subject of unpaid carers, for example. As much as I came on and did my bit on your show, Bonnie, and gave my professional background, my trade, and explained my working class roots, my ordinary left background, if you like, my trade unionism, and so on and so forth. Of course, these days I am an unpaid carer, and there is no representation in Parliament for such people there either. And in fact, Parliament would have to go a great deal further in order to facilitate people to actually stand from that background. They would need more help to actually stand, but that doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't try and stand either. Their voices need to be heard, their causes need to be heard, and for as long as they're not heard, it is the disabled and the unpaid carers who look after them that are going to remain amongst the most put upon in society. So I was quite grateful to Ian Lavery for actually raising that point, because I didn't actually raise it myself.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of headline topic of the night was getting more working class MPs and other political representatives. But, we did cover a number of other topics as well, and had some really good contributions in from our guests. And one of the standout ones for me, I think, was when Claudia Webb talked about how the Tory policies are, by design, really impacting more heavily on women than on anybody else, women and their kids. Shocking number of families it was that she named in there that are being hit by even just by the latest change with this £20 cut that the Tories are determined to force through, even though their own Customs and Revenue Service is telling them that it's going to put people into, put them beyond the point where they can cope anymore.
I think we've got to remember this is in the context of footballers actually having to campaign to make sure school children are fed. Put that in the context of that, and then tell us that you're taking £20 more from those people that are actually struggling to feed their own children. It's just abysmal, and I'm disappointed there isn't more of a noise being made about it by far too many politicians. They're sitting quietly on it, and it's really unacceptable in my eyes.
Again, it comes down to the fact there's no representation there for these people. There are no universal credit claimants, or none that have ever claimed universal credit, so far as I know, that are sitting on any of those green benches for any party. They're not represented. £20 removed from a family is the difference between heating and eating. But for so many of these parliamentarians, it's breakfast. They're so far detached. They have not the faintest idea what it's like to live on that, in poverty, because they don't.
It's meaningless, and yet, as we've seen all too often, they'll happily claim 20p for a pack of paper clips or something, and milk the system as hard as they can, even though a lot of them are wallowing in cash, especially on the Tory benches, but not exclusively. So let's
Sorry, can I just say very quickly, it's not just small expenses that these MPs are billing us, the taxpayers, for. It's massive expenses. In fact, the new minister in charge of education is a millionaire, and he's billed us for heating his stables where we've got kids starving and we've got families going to sleep in their coats because their houses are freezing cold in the winter. It's just immoral. It's totally unacceptable, and we need to rise up against that.
Isn't it just? Yeah. So let's take a quick look. We'll hear what Claudia had to say last night. This is just a little bit of her contribution, but it does give a good flavour as to what the what she was saying in terms of. I mean, well, actually, just before I hit the button on that, I will point out that the UN's special rapporteur on poverty came and inspected this country, and he said exactly the same thing. He said that the Tories' policies were, as far as he could tell, by design, attacking the weakest most heavily, particularly women and particularly children. And, the UN condemned this country for its treatment of disabled people separately to that as well. And, that had very minimal coverage from the so-called mainstream media because it would be embarrassing for the government. But the reality is we are governed by a bunch of people who would embarrass most developing nations in the way that they conduct themselves. And let's hear Claudia talking about that because she was very eloquent on the subject.
I wondered if you could say something about the difficulties that we face as working class women to get our voices actually listened to.
Well, Lord, before I just touch on that, I just really want to just lay out why all of this matters. I mean, it really is important that we have an alternative system and set of people in Parliament. We have a cabinet right now in terms of the government where the representation of women is woefully low, one of the worst probably in Europe, if not in the world, in terms of representation of women, save for some authoritarian states. And Britain's cabinet could probably not look too out of place at times in some of the worst authoritarian places. We have a millionaire prime minister who referred to 250,000 a year newspaper column as chicken feed. We have a millionaire chancellor of the Exchequer married into a family of billionaires who just introduced taxes that disproportionately impact working class people whilst protecting the profits of big business and the incomes of the super wealthy. We have a millionaire health secretary who used to be employed by JP Morgan, a bank that wishes to carve up our NHS, an incredible institution built by the working class, and he wants to carve that up to the highest bidder. It matters. It matters where you come from. So, for instance, it's not surprising that this government acts so overwhelmingly in the interest of landlords. And we may wonder why, because that's when we remember that many of them are in fact landlords themselves. 24% of Conservative MPs are landlords, most of whom rent out more than one property. Around a quarter of all ministers, including the Prime Minister, profit from renting out properties. This means that 5 times as many ministers are landlords when compared to the general population. The planned cut, therefore, to universal credit also demonstrates the utter cruelty of this government of the super rich. So scheduled for the 6th of October, as we know, this will be the biggest overnight cut to the basic rate of social security since the foundation of the modern welfare state and will impact 5.5 million families. That is largely about how it impacts on women and how it impacts on our families and how it impacts on our children. Rather than tax big business and the super rich, the government is determined to ensure that the post-COVID recovery falls hardest on the shoulders of the poorest, falls hardest on the shoulders of those who are racialized within racialized groups, falls hardest on the shoulders of women.
Bonnie, give us your. You go first. Tell us what you made of that body.
Well, once again, women are at the front. You know, it used to be that women and children first used to be seen as an act of chivalry, but now it seems to be women and children first in the firing line for any sort of support or help. I've stood in the last 2 general elections, and as a woman with children and being a single parent, I was only able to do that because I'm lucky enough to have the support of my wider family. But that isn't an option for everybody, and I shouldn't have to rely, if I want to stand for election, I shouldn't have to rely on other people supporting me. There should be something in place once a candidate is selected. If they've got caring needs, whether it be children or other people that they care for, there needs to be something put in place so that candidates can access that. And we're not ruling out so many people who could make fantastic representatives in Westminster or in any other government, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. CLPs should be able to select whoever they want, and they shouldn't have to take into consideration additional complications or additional needs that they might have. If they are the best person, according to that CLP, to represent them and stand for Parliament or their party, then they should be supported by the party, by the system, really, in order to be able to do that. That's the only way you're going to get ordinary people representing ordinary people. But this is exactly what Claudia's point summed up. The number of different instances she was listing off, and it was just phenomenal to listen to, and you could hear the passion and the weight of feeling in her voice as she was ringing out all these endorsements, taking apart the background of Boris Johnson, taking apart the background of Rishi Sunak, going into the level of landlordism that now sits on those green benches. There's just so many of them, and it's a little wonder they won't tackle issues that would, you know, the people across this country need dealt with urgently. Housing is a massive crisis the country over, and Lord knows I know it's a bad problem down here in Cornwall. But when you've got so many landlords in Parliament, they are never going to vote to deal with it properly because it'll affect their own fortunes. And therein lies the crux of the problem.
I mean, those things used to be called a conflict of interest, didn't they? I wonder what happened to that notion.
Yes. And I mean, this is real life politics to people. We've had a comment in here from Callum, who's up in Glasgow by the looks of it. And he says, to be honest, if it wasn't for food pantries, even with the £20 uplift, my family would be choosing between heating and eating now. I'm looking to have just re-entered full-time work, but even with luck, that's not an option for everyone. And I mean, this is, you know, they're one of the key points as well, because the Tories kind of, you know, shameless benefit scrounger rhetoric or whatever. I mean, people on benefits are not scroungers, and most people on benefits are working full-time hours and getting exploited by bosses and not able to get a decent wage for the hours that they put in that allows them to comfortably provide for their families. And that's where we end up with this. I forget the number, but is it something like 2/3 of people, I think, if off the top of my head, that are claiming universal credit are in work?
40%.
40% is it, right? Okay, so still, you know, not quite half, but shocking enough, you know.
See, I think part of the problem is the language that's used around this. You see, we've seen a shift from social security to benefits. Social security was designed to provide a safety net for people so they could survive if they hit a bump in the road. What we're getting now actually is some sort of corporate benefit, because people who are in work doing a proper job and not earning enough, not being paid enough to live, actually what we're doing is we're subsidizing businesses that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to carry on functioning. We need to start making sure that people have the safety net of a social security system rather than businesses having the safety net of a benefit system, because already there's a dichotomy between how much tax individuals are paying and how much tax corporations are paying. So it's win-win for the employers.
Yeah, it's not the only issue either. I mean, Channel 5 for years have been peddling Benefit Street, benefit scroungers, you know, pregnant at 16 and on benefits, whatever other program they're going to make, to basically put the boot into people that are, unfortunately, through whatever circumstances have affected them in life, they have to rely on state aid to help them get by. I'm in exactly the same boat. I'm an unpaid carer. I look after 2 disabled people. I claim it's because I have to, not because I want to. as I spoke to on the show yesterday, I have a trade. I did a 4-year apprenticeship. I can't do it because my family needs me more. Plenty of people out there like that as well. But it's always people like me, as an example, that are attacked for it. It's never the parliamentarians that's bringing back again with their expensive scandals, with their various properties that's go back into housing again. They got their parliamentary residence, which we've been subsidising for them to have, and subsidising their mortgage and what have you, which they then flip and sell for a packet and pocket the difference. And it's taxpayers' money that's facilitating that all of the time. Yet it's the poorest that are the ones that are demonized, not the ones in power, who should actually be behaving themselves and should be held accountable far more for what I see, frankly, is misuse of public funds. And now we've got all these electric companies that we've heard about today that are on the verge of going bust, and they're all looking for bailouts. And we're now hearing that they could end up getting northern rocked, but without any public ownership, without any limitations being put on them at all. This Tory government are basically going to hand them whatever they need to keep going, and then the shareholders will keep getting their cut, and the directors will keep getting their massive exorbitant wages and bonuses. How is this right?
And probably a few extra quid will end up in Tory donations as well. I mean, Callum he follows on though and makes another point in cold, hard economic terms. It's not good to have people underpaid either, because as he says, in Scotland alone, this will mean 2 million a week lost from the high street in revenues. So, one business underpaying people and, for its own benefit, shortchanges everybody else. And I mean, it's worth mentioning at this point, because it did come up last night, that also spending on public services is absolutely the best place to put money in pure economic terms as well, because what was it? 4 times, 3 times, 4 times. So every pound that you spend on the NHS, you get 4. The multiplier effect, as they call it in economics terms, means that £1 in NHS money turns into £4 of economic activity, and that's because you end up with things like, nurses going out and spending money on a coffee in the the high street next to the hospital or whatever, rather than having to go straight home and make do with a cup of the cheapest instant they can find because they're getting underpaid or whatever. And it's that kind of recycling of money through the economy that really boosts how everybody does. And Paul, I don't know if that's his real name or not, but benefits is an American concept. Bring back Social Security. Well, yeah, that's true enough. I mean, that's the idea, was always your social safety net, wasn't it? And the post the pandemic, we're seeing this weird dichotomy really, where we're, some people are making more money, and the lorry drivers, for example, are getting paid much higher wages at the moment because they're in such demand. And at the same time, the bosses are trying to use fire and rehire. They're trying to force down terms and conditions. They're trying to kind of, put people on the least benefit for the work that they do that they can possibly get away with. And we had Belle Ribeiro-Addy on last night, and she had a very simple answer in terms of, one of the main steps that you can take to try to, one, protect the rights and pay and conditions that we have now, but also to gain further. And that was, quite simply join a union. So let's have a look and see what Belle had to say.
You mentioned being a trade union, so that's the first thing that people need to start with. They need to join a trade union. All of the major gains that we've made, all of the U-turns that have been forced right throughout the pandemic in terms of what was offered for support for workers, have all been led on by our fantastic trade unions. And one thing that I have been really, really pleased to see is people joining trade unions a lot more during the pandemic, showing the value that hopefully people can see in collective bargaining in that way. But obviously in response to that, we have a government that is being even more difficult in terms of the activities that trade unions are allowed to carry out. We saw quite disgracefully the Coronavirus Act and various other pieces of legislation being used to target people who are simply picketing things such as fire and rehire, and the really poor pay that nurses were poor pay rise that nurses were offered of 1%. So absolutely joining a trade union, getting involved there and making sure that, you know, we have that collective voice, because it's made so much of a difference in the past. And actually, I think moving forward, and I noticed what you said about the government setting out what they want to do next. I think we need to go back to our 2017 and 2019 manifestos. I think where things aren't broke, we don't need to fix them. And I think where there aren't serious issues, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Yes, we are in a slightly different situation because of the pandemic, but we had all of these great things put forward in our previous manifestos, and I want to see quite as much of that come back as possible. Obviously, with a completely new outlook, looking at the fact that we're trying to recover from the pandemic.
You and John Trickett had an interesting chat about that last night as well, about how to fight for our jobs and pay, etc. So what can you remember? I've got the video if I need to bring it up, but what were you and John talking about in your little bit of the show last night?
Roll VT. Let people see it, and we can have a chat. We covered so much ground last night. I want to make sure that I'm talking about the exact conversation.
I just wondered if you wanted to paraphrase, but here we go.
£1 that's spent on it, so it's completely insane to be considering that the government are taking that away. But the only way we can challenge this is collectively. And if people want to hold on, there's going to be a fight like we've never seen before for people's jobs, terms and conditions. Everybody needs to be collectivized so that we can fight as a unit, as a one, to make sure that jobs and livelihoods are protected. Because off the back of 11 years of austerity, things are likely to get considerably worse as we come out of this pandemic. Any excuse to tighten the belt on ordinary people, the government, the Tories will take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great comments coming in for you on the chat there, Bonnie. So just remind anybody listening out there at the moment, if you want to ask us any questions or put in any comments, I can read them as they come in and put them to our panel as well. John, if I could go to you next, please. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on these as well. If we focus for a minute, just a little more on the right to pay for workers.
Well, let me say I'm a lot older than anybody else on this panel, so there's an advantage of that because I've seen the struggle through different times, and long time before neoliberalism, what we call neoliberalism. I worked as a manual worker in factories in Leeds, fitting as a fitter. And I remember, and I worked in the clothing factories, and back a long time ago now, there was a really powerful shop stewards movement in industry in Britain. And if you think, well, the conditions that we now live under are immutable, will never change, and it's inevitable. You know, just you need to read about it or speak to somebody of my age or older. The shop stewards were very, very powerful. They were rooted in working class communities and in the factories and the workplaces, to the extent that you would see movements taking place which did hike significantly people's conditions and wages back in the 1970s. And I'm thinking about something that's not really been spoken about, because we've talked about the Dagenham situation in Dagenham, but in Leeds, the clothing factories were enormous. Like half of every suit made in the UK and also in the rest of the Commonwealth were made in Leeds. But the thing is, the tailors and garments workers union, as it was, negotiated a deal with the bosses who were quite frightened of a possibility of strike. And the idea was the men would get a penny more per hour than the women from this rise. Now, the number of men was quite small compared to the number of women. I remember going into some of the factories, it was almost exclusively women. They came out on strike. They went from one factory to the next through the whole of Leeds and brought the whole of the clothing industry effectively to its knees. Now, I was looking the other day, and there were statements from the union saying, "Get back to bloody work. We've done a deal. We're not going to rescind the deal that we've done." So, in the end, there are different ways of organising for workers to organise than what we've seen in recent years with the Thatcherite legislation and all that kind of stuff as well. So I think it's important to understand that what we've got now is a massive retreat on where we were. And there is a chance for working class power. And we have to do it. And through the unions, where the unions get it wrong, I think the rank and file need to have the strength and the democracy inside the unions to say, look, this isn't working, let's change it. And that's what did happen.
I tell you what strikes to mind on that, though. I mean, I think John's right that there's a chance for, working class people to cooperate together and retake a lot of power outside of Parliament as well, because we're not getting that from the Labour front bench at the moment for sure. But it certainly puts this new policing bill that the Tories are pushing through at the moment into perspective when you realise that if you pick it in the factory and somebody decides you're annoying, or you stand on a street corner with a placard and somebody decides you're annoying, you could be put in prison for up to 10 years for exercising what at the moment is a lawful right of protest. So they're trying to get the retaliation in early, I think, and stop us from actually exercising that power.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you consider we've had about 40 years of anti-trade union legislation, which shamefully wasn't reversed the last time we had a Labour government, and the restrictions on the activities trade unions can undertake have got ever tighter. However, it's still the case even now that if you work in a unionised workplace, you're likely to be paid better than a non-unionised workplace. You're likely to have better terms and conditions, and you've certainly got more employment rights. And all the employment rights that we currently have, as limited as they are right now, only exist because trade unions have demanded them. And I absolutely believe that the new policing bill, which basically outlaws any kind of protest that might annoy somebody, if it's a bit noisy or something like that, you can be charged with some kind of offence. It's totally unacceptable. But I believe 100% that the reason the government have pushed this through is because they're absolutely terrified of working ordinary people finding their voice and starting making those demands again in a very vociferous way.
And it's worth pointing out, just a little plug there, because I know, Demo, you were talking to Paula Peters from DPAC earlier on, and I covered this on Skwawk Box as well, that was the 28th, so next Tuesday, DPAC are holding an audio riot protest where their point is to be as loud and annoying as possible, to protest the government's mistreatment of disabled people.
Yeah,
but as well, they're also wanting to draw attention to the fact that this policing bill would essentially make those put all of them at risk of a lengthy prison sentence if they were to do the thing once this bill goes through. So the importance of kill the bill, which we saw a centrist journalist have to pay money out to John Trickett, who was on last night, because he misinterpreted the significance of kill the bill. It's about killing the policing legislation, which is going to be a major attack on people's civil rights. But
can I just put in another very quick plug? Actually, on Wednesday it's World Car Free Day, which is part of the movement for the sake of the environment. Obviously, we've got COP26 going to Scotland in November. For anyone who is around Edinburgh on Wednesday, if they're able to join, there's a protest happening outside of Bute House in Edinburgh to protest against the planned cuts to the railway. It's actually an activity that's been coordinated by all 4 transport trade unions. So that's TSSA, RMT, ASLEF and Unite. And they're wanting as many people as possible to turn up outside Bute House at midday on Wednesday to make a noise, because taking away funding for the railway, which is the most environmentally sound mode of transport that exists, full stop, is completely insane at a time where we're trying to look after the planet. So get involved in a protest if you can on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah, the audio riot, the main audio riot is on the 28th. There are regional audio riots, which I dare say are popping up on the DPAC website at the moment on the 25th. So there may well be a mini audio riot in a place near you. So get your bells and whistles and your drums and get out there and make a racket and make sure the government are listening to disabled people, because they're going to make themselves heard. Make no mistake about that. As far as this policing bill goes, we got to be careful that we don't end up saying, well, we're going to advocate that you break the law. However, that said, a bad law is a bad law. And if you want to be in a position to challenge that, then the challenge of the fight back and the kickback against bad laws and bad legislations is always invariably led by the trade union movement. So join a trade union, make sure that you can play your own part in it, because this bill is going to make free speech essentially illegal if it passes. The things that they can do off the basis of just somebody making a passing complaint is harrowing, the sentencing that they're proposing. And I think in practice, it's not going to work very well at all anyway. Our prisons are already overcrowded. If everybody kicks up a stink or, makes a bit of a racket on the street, gets reported and gets sentenced to 10 years in prison, there's going to be a very significant prison population problem very, very quickly. It's not well thought out, it's idiotic, and it's a violation of human rights. And the trade unions, which are filled with ordinary left people, are led by ordinary left people, are the place to be to push back against that.
Yeah. Now it's slightly off topic because it didn't come up in last night's program because it only brought today, but we have had one question in here from Kay Smith saying, anyone heard about Unison going against members' votes? Any updates? So, I mean, yes, in short, the left members on Union's Labour Link Committee, which is their kind of feed into the Labour Party and its policies, met in the last day or two to decide the Union's policies for, or positions going into Labour conference, which starts on Saturday. And there's a left majority on that committee now. They voted 11-8 for a series of measures for the Union to stand up for at the conference. And according to those left members on that committee, the staff of the Union, which is right run at the moment, has blocked every single one of those measures, claiming on the basis of some rule that they declined to evidence that it was against the rules to have an 11-8 vote. Putting something through, it had to be a 2/3 vote or a 3/4 vote or whatever, and stopping policies which included the reinstatement of Jeremy Corbyn, but on various other issues. We don't know yet how the Union, the left-dominated NEC and the left-run Labour Link now would have voted on the David Evans issue, but no doubt the same tactic would have been pulled there if there were voting to join the increasing number of unions who are saying enough is enough in terms of David Evans's attack on democracy within the Labour Party and on the human rights of its members. So sorry for that slight aside on there, but let's get back to something. If this works, let's do something that is a little bit of fun to begin with. Let me just try and get this connected, because we did one of the embarrassing bits last week. In the last week was Keir Starmer's gymnastics, really, to try to avoid ending up with how would you put it? Trying to avoid saying that there should be a wealth tax, and he put on quite a show. And there was a funny thing that got put out on this rehashed version of the MASH program, or whatever they used to call it, on the BBC, that's now moved on to the Dave channel. And if I can get this working, we'll watch the lad dissect forensically Keir Starmer's performance on that through in the medium of comedy. So hopefully that's there and will work. Here we go. Need to get the sound on 1 second.
Say yes, you'd rather tax the wealthy.
Well,
yes. Yes, say yes. You'd rather tax the wealthy than the poor. This isn't a contentious issue, Keir. This isn't like saying we should break up the United Kingdom or that ABBA are rubbish, okay? Just say it and get this over with.
People who earn their money from property.
People with wealth, yeah.
Stocks, shares.
Yeah, wealthy people. Mm-hmm.
So in principle, you would prefer a wealth tax of some sort?
Yes.
I think we should look at all of these options.
Say yes, Beth, like that.
So
because they're
you would prefer wealth taxes than a raise of income tax?
Yes, Beth.
I think we should look across the board at something that is fair.
Here, there is no board to look across, okay? The only board in front of you right now is a big wooden sign that says poor people are being shit on. Please read that. Talk like an opposition leader for once, rather than this wobbly duck thing that you do.
You would prefer a wealth tax to raise an income tax?
Yes, Beth.
I think we look at a broad range here.
A broad range of what? There's no wide variety of options here. It's either tax the rich or don't. Stop running around in circles. This isn't the plot of Inception, okay? Just tell her you would prefer a wealth tax.
The idea that we don't... One thing.
Can you just answer that? Just, do you prefer, in principle, wealth taxes to income tax increases?
Yes, Beth. Yes, Beth. Yes, Beth. Yes.
I think we need to look at a range of options.
Again, there's only one.
You're not going to answer.
Yes, he is, Beth. Yes, he is.
Well, we need to look at a range of options.
Right after he said we need to look at a range of options for the third time.
Those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share.
So, a wealth tax. I mean, honestly, why can't you just say this? Why can't you just say...
Yes, all of those options are a wealth tax. I mean, in the broadest sense of the word, and we should look at it.
Did he just... Am I dreaming, or did he just... Yeah, I'm dreaming, definitely dreaming.
That was very well done. And if anybody hasn't seen Inception, it's a film about where people get inside your dreams and and the people who are doing it start to wonder whether they've got a connection with reality themselves. And the way that they tell is by spinning one of those things. And if it doesn't fall down, then you're still in a dream. So that was his. That was where he ended up. But we did see John Trickett and Howard Beckett be a lot more blunt than Keir Starmer and take a lot less time to get to it. Let's have a quick look. We'll start with John's.
Absolutely. So I've got to come to you on this now as well, John, because you've been doing a great job on Twitter of highlighting many of these issues. So I know you've got tons to say on it as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to give all the figures because they're boring, but they are very, very stark. And if you're not following me on Twitter, do so because more or less every single day we're putting out data which is absolutely crystal clear and double and triple checked so we don't make any mistakes. And you'll have loads of armory because, yeah, I agree with Howard completely. We need new media. That's what this is tonight, communicating in new ways, getting around Murdoch. We can ignore Murdoch if we can communicate directly, but also the power of organizing, the power of political education, and the power of giving confidence to people that our arguments are correct. And that, I think, is a central part. So the stuff, some people say to me, you're only ever doing figures and statistics. I am, because I want to give people ammunition when they're in the pub or when they're at work or at home or wherever. You know, did you know X, Y, or Z? Now, so here's a new one I haven't said before. Why is it that out of country doesn't tax wealth, but it taxes income? It taxes income, but it only taxes one kind of income properly, and that's earned income. But if you think about it, there are lots of people whose income is unearned, and often it's quite large amounts of money. I'll give you, for example, dividends. People who've got a large amount of money, invest in a company, it pays a dividend. It's unearned income. You haven't earned it. You've just put some dosh into shares. It's unearned income. And the other thing is capital gains. If you've got, I'm not talking about houses now, because I think we should be careful about taxing, doing more to tax houses. But if you've got wealth and it increases from one year to the next, effectively, It's unearned income. You didn't earn it. It's just because the asset increased in value, partly through all sorts of magical effects of the so-called free market. But dividends, investments, capital gains, all are taxed less than earned income. I'm just going to give you the quick, three figures really quick. Earned income, the basic rate is 20%. You pay £1 in every 5 above a certain level. Dividends, instead of 20%, you pay 7.5% tax on your dividends. And on capital gains, you pay 10%, half what you pay on earned income. Why is it that we don't tax wealth and we don't tax unearned income to the same extent as earned income? What I think it shows you is, after all, we live in let's call a spade a spade. It's a capitalist society. It protects capital and wealth and exploits the earnings of ordinary people.
So that's John pointing out that wealth taxes are actually fairer than income taxes. And we also had Howard linking the wealth tax and the messaging around a wealth tax with the need for independent media, which I guess is a topic dear to our hearts here on Socialist Telly.
It is a binary choice coming out of COVID as to who will be made to pay for this. Will it be wealth tax or will it be workers?
Yeah.
And people have to decide which side they are on, and that includes the Labour front bench and includes Keir Starmer. The wealth tax is obviously the implementation of wealth taxes. You can talk about tax avoidance and you can talk about tax havens, but the simple reality of it is that individuals and corporates are making vast amounts of money during this crisis and they have not been taxed for it. And if we take the supermarkets, for example, that got business rates relief and they eventually were forced to give that business rates relief back because they were making absolutely billions through a crisis and getting away with paying very little tax. So it's an obvious choice that is out there. There's obvious options in respect of mansion taxes that we should be talking about. Obviously, we should be clamping down in respect of tax havens, and obviously we should be taxing the wealth that exists in society much more, taxing assets instead of taxing income. And the recent debacle over social care is the worst of the examples of it, that suddenly there is a recognition within society because people have been released, if you like, from hospitals into care homes, discharged into care homes when they got COVID, resulting in thousands and thousands of deaths. Everyone can see that. So everyone is talking about the fact that we need a new social care system. And what is the government's response to that? To say that we will tax national insurance, which is obviously going to tax the poor disproportionately to the wealthy because of the way national insurance is geared, when in fact that was the moment and time to say we will tax wealth. Now, there's many ways that it could be done with bonds that are attached to mansions, using a form of equity releases so as people have to take money out of those massively wealthy assets, clamping down on inheritance tax avoidance. These are things that Labour should be talking from the rooftops about and were in 2017, I have to say. And whenever you talk about the rights of workers along with wealth tax, the two things go like hand in glove with each other. Who could forget the policy in 2017 that talked about a ratio of 20-1 for the top earners to the workers who are working on the shop floor, and a ratio that in itself will see wealth taxes resulting from it and more coffers in the treasury. And I would just say this, Jennifer, whenever we talk about, and I do want to reference, John in particular talked about having to build from the bottom. And I do want to reference what that means because I said at the start about the fact that we need to own the narrative coming out of COVID. And, at the end of the Second World War, and that is probably the historical example that is closest to what we've just been through with COVID. At the end of the Second World War, debt was 250 times the size of income. But that didn't stop people saying we want 1 million council houses. It didn't stop people saying we want a social state. We want an NHS. And it didn't stop people saying we want our kids to go to third-tier education, working class kids to third-tier education without the saddle of debt that we now have in 2021. And it's that type of ambition that we need now to speak about on behalf of working class communities. And the way to do it, and this is the essence of this, we can all agree that we have to have something that is organic, comes from workplaces, comes from our communities, gives confidence to people to build, gives confidence to people to be in a collective. But how do we achieve that? And right here now, the only way to achieve that is by us talking about new methods of communicating to those people in those communities. How can we own the message? If we rely on mainstream media, if we rely on the right-wing media barons, then we will not own the narrative. They will fall into populist debate about whether or not you should be in Europe or out of Europe. They will fall into populist messages that are in fact racist messages when they should be talking about class issues of socialism. And that's why it is so important right here now that if we are to build in those communities that we desperately all want to build in, and in those workplaces, to give power back to the shop stewards that John referenced, then we have to be able to give the message through our own media streams in order that people can realize the injustice of the society that they live in, but also so as people can realize that there are different societies out there that have different rewards for the working class. And it is vitally important, Jennifer, that we do this now in haste, in hurry, because we are going down the path of a green industrial revolution. And if we're not careful, once again, John referenced the share dividend of Margaret Thatcher, this shared democracy, own shares in a company, and you will be democratizing the economy. Absolute nonsense.
So, I mean, there is one more clip if we get time for it, but I suspect we might run out of time before that. But, you know, I tell you what, the thing that jumps out, I mean, you don't get contributions like that on your typical BBC or Sky politics show, really, do you? New media and fairer. Let's talk about what's going on taxes and how the Labour Party in particular as well is or isn't performing on that front as well.
Yeah, the BBC.
Isn't it remarkable? You ask some ordinary people their position on tax and you get a straight answer. People that are living this life and experiencing the difficulties are able to explain where these things are wrong. I saw some figures in the last week that said a 22-year-old graduate on £28,000 a year, with paying back their tuition fees, with their income tax, with the rise in national insurance, they will be paying an effective tax rate of almost 50% of everything that they earn. That's more tax actually than somebody on £40,000. It's just completely back to front. The increase in national insurance significantly hits people on the lowest incomes much harder than it does people at the top incomes. VAT is another regressive tax that people with smaller incomes are hardest hit by. If you've got a limited budget, you don't buy the washing machine with a 10-year warranty. You buy a washing machine that will hopefully last you 2 years, and then you've got to buy it again, and then you're going to pay VAT on that each time. Now, I think the whole scam of the VAT system needs a review, because quite honestly, that was a system that was introduced as a requirement for us to join the EC back in the 70s. Now we've Brexited, that needs to be reviewed, because actually it used to be a tax on luxury items, but now I think pretty much everything that anybody has to buy in order to survive is charged VAT. Charging VAT on yachts. How many yachts does a millionaire need? It's a joke. Let's just scrap that. Let's scrap VAT. Let's make sure people are taxed accordingly to the money that they've got to live on, whether it's through income or, as Howard said, from assets and other means of getting money in. Let's not forget that company directors pay themselves dividends rather than salaries quite often, because they get charged a lot less tax on that too. There's so many disparities and so much unfairness in the tax system as it currently exists. The whole lot needs a root and branch review, as far as I'm concerned. And if I can just very quickly suggest, the teacher in me will never die. Everyone watching this, if they went and did a bit of research to find out how much of the land in their borough, where they live, their constituency, what have you, find out how much of that is actually owned by an offshore company, and then ask yourself, why is it that we've got inflated house prices? Why have we got a housing issue? How much of our land is now being banked by companies that have no financial interest in this country other than to maximize the amount of money that they've got coming in. And have a look as well in your local high street, in your town, how many luxury flats are sat there empty, because the developers of them would rather they sat empty to create a shortage of supply of housing, which pushes all the prices up for everybody. These things are criminal, and somebody needs to call it all out.
It's not just properties or houses either. Quite often you only have to go down to your own town centre and you see all the empty shops that are kept empty, and it's exactly the same case there as well. Yeah, you wouldn't exactly get Howard Beckett allowed to speak like that on the BBC, would you? Because they'd be too busy looking for a gotcha. I'm not singling out the BBC either. It's mainstream establishment media all over. They don't want these messages to get through. They want to bring these people on and then try and get them so as to undermine their arguments. But when they're allowed to speak and actually get their messages across as they are, as we facilitated them to do, they have a lot to say, and it's salient and it's clear and it's straightforward speak, and people get it and understand it. It's not really much of a surprise. I mean, you go back to that sketch of Michael Spicer's. I dearly used to love his when he used to put them out on Twitter quite often. He doesn't do it so often anymore. But you know, just watching a bit of Beth Rigby die inside as she's trying to get Keir Starmer to say he would commit to a wealth tax. Why is it so difficult for a Labour leader to do that? It's plainly obvious that you've got in a capitalist society, as John was saying, you've got everything geared towards taxing earnings, but not investments, not dividends, not all sorts of other manner of incomes either. And it's simply wrong. Why are the wealthiest allowed to keep so much of their wealth at our expense? We're supposed to be the fourth richest country or fifth richest country. It seems to change one week to the next in the world. But where is all the wealth? Because most of us don't see it. It is not equally shared out in any way, shape, or form. We have a very, very unequal society. And you do have to ask yourself why a Labour leader would not be wanting more equality. Surely these are the voters he should be pursuing. These are the voters he should be appealing to. This is what the party's there to stand for, isn't it? Or is it not anymore? In which case, what on earth does Keir Starmer's Labour actually stand for anymore?
Well, yeah, quite. I mean, if ever we needed a real opposition standing up and actually saying what's going on, now's the time. If anything, even more than in the Corbyn years. It was, you know, he showed that it could be done if you actually make a noise about what's going on. You can change the narrative rather than thinking you've just got to try and piggyback along with it and hope you'll look, I don't know, slightly less evil or slightly more competent than the opposition. And, you know, he's managing neither at the moment, Keir Starmer. But, you know, the last bit we would have shown if there'd been time is about the, you know, what Howard was talking about, how the right will exploit crisis in order to enrich itself and tighten its grip on power. And Naomi Klein, I'll just recommend that book to anybody if they haven't read it yet. A very good book called Shock Doctrine about the right, not just, you know, they'll wait for a crisis to come along, but if one doesn't come at the time that they want one, they'll manufacture one. And in a lot of senses, I think we're seeing the, you know, the UK government now, yeah, some of the policies only make sense, certainly in terms of the spread of the pandemic. If you think they want that, you know, they want that crisis to be continuing and growing in order for them to exploit that and enrich their class, which is what they're all about. So who wants to give us the last couple of minutes on the way out to talk about that?
Well,
should I go, Damo?
Go on, tell me. It's
what the Tories stand for. I mean, they've been around since, what, 1834? They've done nothing but enrich the rich and work for them. Yeah, as I said, we were talking about wealth taxes a moment ago. You're never going to get the Tories dealing with a wealth tax because it's this inequality that seems to be built into this neoliberal capitalist society that we're in suits them because it funds them. These people that get away with paying low tax or next to no tax or get lovely government contracts which make them lots and lots of money, it all results in a kickback to the Tory party, which keeps their fetid party funded and keeps them going. And it seems to me that Keir Starmer wants the same for himself and his party because he wants to court donors. He doesn't want members. And we're seeing the results of those attacks on members as in the news each day being covered, and it's intolerable. We need the fight back, and it's got to come from ordinary left people. It's going to come from ordinary left MPs, the few that are worth their salt in the Labour Party. It's got to come from ordinary left people and ordinary working people within the trade union movements as well, playing their part in this fight back, because this is where it comes from, the grassroots. Nobody's going to do it for us. The wealthy have got the Tories doing everything for them. It suits them, and they've got the media as well doing it. But
we'll cut in their demo because we're right at the end of the program. But I will point out, I mean, again, I think Howard referred to it during the discussion, but if you want to pretend that things are unaffordable, which is the way that they always, unsustainable, that's the usual buzzword for it, isn't it? Then you have to make them fail. And I think that's what we're seeing now with the NHS. It's what we're seeing in various areas. But as Howard pointed out, in the aftermath of World War II, this country was groaning under far bigger relative debt than anything that's known now. And yet they managed to build 1 million council houses, create the NHS from scratch, and, build the whole social security safety net from the cradle to the grave as it was, and give people not just the chance of a better life, but actually give them a better life. And that's what we need, really. So the idea that we can't afford what we need now is bollocks. We are far wealthier as a country overall. The money is in the wrong place. And that's why we need a wealth tax. That's why we need working class MPs in Parliament and councillors in wherever, in order to enact and push through those policies as well, and actually force the the evil empire that we're all groaning under at the moment onto the back foot, and start to take some territory back. So I thank you, everybody who has given us the time to watch the program so far. You're more likely to be watching this on catch up because of the technical problems that Twitter has been having. In which case, thank you for that as well. Do spread the word, and do make sure bit.ly/capital O, capital L, Fest, F-E-S-T. You can watch the whole Left Festival of Ideas from last night, the extraordinary Festival of Ideas in a lot of ways. And again, thank you for watching this roundup. Hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you a flavour for what to look for when you go and find it. Have a good evening and a good rest of the week, everybody. Take care.
See you. Thanks. Bye.